The evening of November 20, 2001, began like any other for Rob Andrew, a respected advertising executive and deacon at North Pointe Baptist Church. He arrived at his Oklahoma City home, planning to pick up his two children, Tricity and Parker, for Thanksgiving visitation. But this routine family moment would violently shatter. Inside the garage, Rob was ambushed, shot twice with a 16-gauge shotgun, his life brutally extinguished at 39. His estranged wife, Brenda Andrew, sustained a superficial gunshot wound to her arm, claiming two masked gunmen were responsible. This sudden, horrific event marked the beginning of a legal saga that would challenge fundamental principles of justice and fairness. Rob and Brenda Andrew had built a life together since their marriage in June 1984, right after college. Rob, born in 1962 in Enid, Oklahoma, was a natural family man, known for his high marks and successful career at Jordan & Associates. Brenda, born in 1963, also from Enid, was a quiet child, devoted to her church, a stay-at-home mother, and taught Sunday school. The couple had two children, Tricity and Parker. Yet, beneath the seemingly perfect Christian facade, cracks began to show. By the early 2000s, their marriage had deteriorated significantly, with Rob confiding to friends about their strained intimacy, and Brenda engaging in multiple extramarital affairs, setting the stage for a tragic unraveling. The seeds of Rob's murder were sown long before that fateful night. In 1999, Rob introduced Brenda to James Pavitt, an insurance broker and fellow member of North Pointe Baptist Church. By February 2000, Rob had purchased an $800,000 life insurance policy through Pavitt, naming Brenda as the beneficiary. As the Andrews' marriage further crumbled, Brenda and James Pavitt began an affair in August 2001. Just weeks later, in late September 2001, Brenda initiated divorce proceedings, asking Rob to move out. Then, in October 2001, a chilling incident occurred. Someone cut the brake lines on Rob Andrews' car. Rob suspected Brenda and Pavitt were trying to kill him and immediately attempted to remove Brenda as his life insurance beneficiary, but it was too late. On November 20, 2001, Brenda Andrew called Rob, asking him to come to the house at 7 p.m. to light the pilot light on the furnace in the garage. Rob, ever the responsible father, agreed, arriving to pick up his children for Thanksgiving. As he entered the garage, the trap was sprung. He was shot twice with his own 16-gauge shotgun. Brenda then made a frantic 911 call, claiming two masked gunmen had attacked them. But investigators quickly grew suspicious. Brenda's own gunshot wound to her arm, allegedly from a .22 caliber pistol, was superficial. Prosecutors would later allege this injury was self-inflicted, or at least staged, to support her narrative of being a victim in a violent home invasion. The day after Rob Andrews' murder, as his funeral arrangements were being made, Brenda Andrew and James Pavitt made a shocking move. They fled the country, taking Brenda's two children, Tricity and Parker, with them to Mexico. This sudden disappearance, just hours before Rob's memorial, intensified suspicions. For 3 months, authorities tracked them until, on February 28, 2002, Brenda Andrew and James Pavitt were apprehended at the Mexican border. Facing intense scrutiny, Pavitt eventually confessed to shooting Rob Andrew. However, he maintained a defiant stance, consistently insisting that Brenda had no involvement in the murder, a claim that would be heavily contested in court. With both suspects in custody, the legal process began. James Pavitt's trial commenced on August 25, 2003. Prosecutors meticulously presented evidence, painting a picture of a calculated murder driven by greed and illicit passion. On September 16, 2003, after intense deliberations, a jury found James Pavitt guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder of Rob Andrew. Just over a month later, on October 21, 2003, he was formally sentenced to death. Despite his conviction, Pavitt's steadfast declaration that Brenda was innocent would linger, adding a complex layer to the upcoming trial of his accomplice. Brenda Andrews' 6-week trial began on January 12, 2004, in Oklahoma County. Prosecutors Fern Smith and Gaylan Geiger built their case around the $100,000 life insurance policy and the illicit affair. However, a significant portion of their strategy focused on Brenda's character, particularly her sex life. Male witnesses testified that Brenda was a sex-crazed hoochie who wore tight, short dresses. Prosecutors displayed her thong underwear to the jury, questioning why a grieving widow would own such items, and described her as a slut puppy. This sustained character assassination aimed to portray Brenda as a bad wife, a bad mother, and a bad woman, a strategy that would later become a central point of her appeals. Beyond the character attacks, the prosecution presented key forensic and circumstantial evidence. An expert witness testified that the powder burns on Brenda's clothing and arm indicated her wound was fired within 2 inches, consistent with a self-inflicted or staged injury. While initial claims of Rob Andrews' blood spatter on Brenda's clothing were later disproven by DNA, other details emerged. A witness recounted seeing Brenda in a rural target practice area 8 days before the murder, where 16-gauge shotgun shells were later found. Furthermore, evidence was presented of Brenda and Pavitt attempting to forge Rob's signature to change his life insurance policy before the brake line incident, demonstrating a clear pattern of premeditation. After weeks of testimony, including Rob Andrews' journal entries detailing Brenda's infidelity, the jury reached its verdict. On September 22, 2004, Brenda Andrew was found guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder in Oklahoma County. The same day, Judge Bragg sentenced her to death, making her the only woman on Oklahoma's death row. She also received an additional 10 years and a $10,000 fine for the conspiracy charge. The conviction solidified the narrative that Brenda, alongside James Pavitt, orchestrated Rob Andrews' murder, not just for the $800,000 life insurance policy, but for a new life free from her failing marriage, a verdict that would face years of legal challenges. Brenda Andrew immediately began her lengthy appeals process. On June 21, 2007, the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals, or OCCA, upheld her conviction and sentence. While acknowledging some of the evidence about her sex life was irrelevant, the OCCA deemed these errors harmless. However, Judge Arlene Johnson, in a powerful dissent, argued that much of the evidence had no purpose other than to hammer home that Brenda Andrew was a bad wife, a bad mother, and a bad woman, highlighting potential gender bias. Years later, in 2023, the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals affirmed the denial of her federal habeas petition, a decision also met with a dissent from Judge Robert Bacharach, setting the stage for Supreme Court intervention. The case of Andrew v. White eventually reached the highest court in the land. On January 21, 2025, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a per curiam decision, vacating the 10th Circuit's judgment and remanding the case. This was a significant moment. The court clarified its stance from Payne v. Tennessee, 1991, emphasizing that the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment indeed provides a mechanism for relief when evidence is introduced that is so unduly prejudicial it renders a trial fundamentally unfair. This decision reinforced protections against character assassination and unfairly prejudicial evidence in criminal trials, especially in capital cases, signaling a potential shift in how lower courts must evaluate such claims. Following the Supreme Court's directive, the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals revisited Brenda Andrews' case in January 2026. However, a panel of judges again ruled against her, maintaining that the gendered evidence did not undermine her right to a fair trial, asserting that Andrew had not adequately challenged much of this evidence during her state appeals. Undeterred, on April 27, 2026, Andrews' counsel, Jessica Sutton, filed a petition for rehearing with the 10th Circuit. They argued that the panel had failed to comply with the Supreme Court's specific instructions and had disregarded the cumulative and deeply prejudicial effect of the gender-biased testimony, insisting that the fight for a truly fair trial was far from over. The Andrew v. White case transcends the specifics of Brenda Andrews' conviction, establishing a critical legal precedent. The Supreme Court's ruling explicitly affirmed that the Due Process Clause guards against unduly prejudicial evidence, ensuring that trials remain fundamentally fair. This case has ignited a vital discussion about gender bias and sex shaming within the legal system, particularly in death penalty cases involving women. Legal scholars, including Mark Bookman, cite Andrew's situation as a stark example of the evil woman theory, where societal stereotypes can influence judicial outcomes. The ongoing appeals and dissents from judges like Arlene Johnson and Robert Bacharach underscore the persistent challenges of ensuring equitable justice, solidifying this case's place in the ongoing evolution of American jurisprudence.